Welcome to another episode of the Mr. Therapist and the Counselor podcast. I'm doing this quick video from my bedroom because we didn't get a chance to record it earlier. I don't have my co-host Jesse with me, but he will be in this episode this week. We're going to be talking about Imposter Phenomenon with our special guest Lupita from Therapy of the Sun. Lupita is in private practice. She's a badass Latinx therapist, breaking cycles, helping her community, and stepping into discomfort and courage as she's doing it. So we're going to talk a little bit about what imposter phenomenon is in this episode. Enjoy the show. All right, so we have Lupita here with us for our episode today. And let me introduce you, Lupita, really fast before we get into this. Lupita is a bilingual Chicana psychotherapist. I like that. Raised in predominantly Black and Brown communities in Southern California. And she is the sole owner of Therapy of the Sun, a private practice located in Norwalk, California. And Latina-owned small business. She offers individual therapy to young professionals of color residing in California. She specializes on working with imposter syndrome. So, and that's on it, and healing generational wounds that may be influenced their experience with imposter syndrome. So, Lupita, today's episode, I think we want to talk about imposter syndrome and understand that a little bit better. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little scared about today's episode.
You're scared of Lupita, or you're scared about the topic?
I'm scared of the topic.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
I feel like
She seems very kind and caring, already to start.
How are you feeling today, Lupita?
I'm doing good. I feel like I may have over caffeinated a little bit in the morning, but just trying it out a little bit because I usually don't drink coffee. And I was like, you know what? Today I'm gonna try it out. And yeah, that was not the best thing.
What'd you get?
It was like a shaken espresso, like a brown sugar shaken espresso.
Oh man, you got caffeine, you got sugar. You're gonna go hard today. I really like it.
Yeah, and I only had half of it too. So
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Let's save it for the other half of the podcast. I am not as caffeinated as I normally am today. So I think you guys are going to balance me out. So that'll be because you're always up. You're always caffeinated.
It's caffeinated. Yeah. It's the last vice kind of in my life these days is caffeine. Yeah. So I'm holding on so tightly I won't let it go. But I'll be ready to go. So.
Very good. So we got a good episode. Two caffeinated, lovely people here. So why don't we get started? Why don't we define
what is imposter syndrome? I'll say this, Lupita. First time I heard imposter syndrome, for some reason, automatically I was thinking of they say something in program. It's called fake it till you make it, right? And I thought to myself, I was like, holy shit. I was like, I feel like an imposter a lot of the times. I feel like I'm not as genuine. I was just talking to Manny before we started, like the idea of we have to perform in a lot of ways. Like I feel like the world is a stage, and so often we have to be on, and sometimes we don't want to be on. So that was my initial thought on it, and then I read more into it. So yeah, what is imposter syndrome? Could you break that down for me?
Yeah. The experience with imposter syndrome, and I want to be clear that even though it's and I use it as well. I use the word imposter syndrome or the phrase imposter syndrome very often. But really, when you look at research or you look at just information on imposter syndrome, people really want to destigmatize the experience of imposter syndrome, because when they use the word syndrome, it makes it seem like it's an illness or some sort of like a terrible thing, right? But rather, it's supposed to be acknowledged as a phenomenon, right? Imposter phenomenon, IP. And so I use imposter syndrome just because a lot of people use it that way, and I feel like it's a little bit more understood that way. But it is the inability to believe that your achievements were basically your own achievements, right? Like you usually dismiss it as like, oh, well, it was good luck, or I was at the right place, right time, or I was faking it till I made it. And, usually they don't really take that credit, and they don't usually believe that where they are in life is because of what they did or that they were necessarily supposed to be there. So they don't really take it in, that achievement or that success, they don't take it in. And a lot of the times they are fearful that they're going to be caught And that's where that idea of like being caught as a fraud comes up a lot, right? And so you may not necessarily see it as or I guess it isn't necessarily seen as a syndrome or as an illness, but you can see how sometimes it could align to like people that experience a lot of like anxiety, right? Because you're so anxious and like wanting to like hide that experience, like you don't want other people to know. So there's maybe some experiences with anxiety, maybe depression, low self-esteem, that sort of stuff, but there isn't really quite as much research to say like because you have this, you'll have that. It's more so like parallels or sprinkles of symptoms that are similar.
Yeah, it sounds like it's something that you would get stuck in, struggle with maybe, and it could lead to you having like a lot of anxiety or a diagnosis of depression or something on that level.
Yeah, I feel like it could lead there, but there isn't really like a causation, right? And that's where you get into like the stats part of it, where it's like, there's, there's not a causation or a correlation. It might sometimes lead there, but it doesn't always. But even just understanding that the experience itself is very common, like, and people don't necessarily talk about it. When you talk about imposter syndrome or phenomenon, 70% of people will experience it at some point in their life. So that's a pretty high, and I'm pretty sure it's more than 70, to be quite honest, because it feels, I feel like if once you get into a new space or a new like experience or role, like everyone is going to experience this uneasiness of like, oh shit, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't really want people to know what I'm doing because I got this role for a reason, but I'm gonna fake it until I figure it out.
Yeah, 70% is high. I wonder how many people experience it, don't report it, right? And then how many people don't even know that they're going through it,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hearing it's you're talking about this, you're defining it, and I'm totally going like, yep, like check, check, check. Like I feel like like it feels so familiar to me, the experience of imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, like especially as you talked about like the you discrediting your achievements. It's like and I'm thinking about like we talked about education earlier and how education is something that I I can lean on as something of like, oh, I proved myself because I got this bachelor's degree, I got this master's degree. But at the same time, it kind of gets me in trouble because I'm like, wait, like I don't even know if I really like should I have made it out? Like should I have graduated? Like how did I get past some of these exams or some of these like under the radar with some of these professors, right? Like if they really
Mhm.
knew what I knew, like would they actually want me practicing in the field like that? And that can come up sometimes. So it just kind of brings me back to these feelings or these experiences that I have at times.
I would say for me too, we were talking about it. I would say the one of the things I'm probably most intimidated about when I'm working with clients is their educational background. It seems like because truth be told, like I have a certification. I don't have like these high degrees. I was telling Manny sometimes when people start talking about like their master degrees or they'll start talking about where they go to college, like I'll walk into a room, I'll find a way to get out of that room because I feel like they're gonna like figure it out like I am not that educated like and I feel like because of that they're gonna be like you don't know what you're talking about. I've had so many clients say they'll look to a doctor or they'll look to like a certain level of like they'll take their feedback over mine not just because of the status. They look for those plaques on the wall. It's like that almost gives them that like okay a doc it's my mind went to this idea of like almost like the opiate epidemic where it was like well a doctor prescribed it to me, it can't be a bad thing, right? Like this is a certified educated person, he would never give me anything bad. But as I was telling Manny though, like that is one of the things when somebody comes in the room I'm like they're gonna find out like I can't express myself or have the same like dialogue or and yeah it's I start to feel like I don't belong. Like they're gonna know like I'm just this guy who's got this certification and what qualifications do I really have to really do this? So and working around a bunch of therapists that were like going for their masters, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't belong here. I don't belong here. I so badly wanted to be a part of it. And it was like I was, I by being around people that had been working in the field, I was like, I'll get better this way. Like it's almost like street smarts in the sense of just like if I'm gonna pick these things up, even though I don't have the background, I'm gonna learn this. So
Yeah. So now you know how insecure we are, Lupita.
Well, it even reminds me of my own experience too, because just because I work with imposter syndrome doesn't mean that I don't experience it myself, right? And I think that when speaking about academia, like academia is very achievement oriented. Like it, whatever like you have to have an A, or you have to have a certain GPA, or those those degrees. Like the whole world is very like achievement oriented, and so I feel like for myself, I grew up in Inglewood and like Hawthorne, all those areas are very, again, predominantly Black, brown. So I was always around people that spoke like me, that looked like me. And so going off to college, like that shit fucking blew my mind, because it's like, I realized that I didn't really learn as much in high school that the average peer did, and I also didn't necessarily. I was never really exposed to other ethnicities, and so being in a room with like 500 students, and then like only another person is the same as me, it can blow your mind, and it makes you feel like you don't belong. And knowing that you may not have learned the same level of information that the other person did because you're from a low income community, like it's almost, you're afraid to even raise your hand, you're afraid to even ask for help. And so those experiences are very much like the things that define me. Like I experienced imposter syndrome, and sometimes I still do too, because just because I'm a therapist and have my license doesn't necessarily mean that there's a lot of people that look like me and speak like me in the therapy world anyway. And so I feel like whenever I go into new spaces, or I go into new certifications or whatever, like it's still the same shit. Like I still feel like I'm the only one.
That's it, it really is, and that's very validating to hear from you. How did you even get into, like, how did you, were you like get into just like, I'm gonna help people with this? I don't know if if there was a moment where you were like, you know what, this is important for me to start helping people with, or even working on.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't really even know about imposter phenomenon until like after college, after even my master's probably. I didn't even know what it was. I didn't know that that's what I was experiencing. It wasn't until I like got into group practice, and I went into group practice, and this was maybe about like 2000 and crap, like 13, maybe 14. And I went into group practice, and it was in a very like affluent neighborhood. And, they're charging a fuck ton of money for their sessions. And here I am being an intern, and I'm like, shit, like they don't even know what the hell they're doing. And they're charging this amount. And like, I don't know what I'm doing either. And I'm charging this amount. And so it just makes you really realize like a lot of people feel the same way, but they're almost kind of like, again, faking it till they make it, and realizing like, there's a lot of people like me that look like me, that are also in spaces like me, that feel like they're the only ones, and they don't even know what they're actually experiencing. They have no name for it. And so I feel like my own personal experience with imposter syndrome and with like going into the private practice world really motivated me to want to work with people that are experiencing a similar feeling.
Awesome. What you just said is so important. Like, we're all experiencing this, and I think it hit me when you said that, because I literally just had a therapy session like a week ago, a week and a half ago, or a week ago. I don't remember the exact date, but I remember talking about this feeling of like, man, like I just feel like I'm the only one who doesn't know what they're doing. And my therapist says like, Manny, we all feel that way. So, and like to hear you say that, like I heard that. I remember I needed to hear it in that moment. And I hope someone who's listening and maybe struggling a little bit with imposter syndrome, or they're not trying to understand what imposter phenomenon is. I gotta adjust my wording there. Is I hope,
It's fine.
I hope that they can know that, right? And like know that like, hey, like probably your colleagues are probably experiencing this, your friends are probably experiencing this, the professionals you go seek out for help are probably experiencing this as well. Yeah, I have another question. So if what's so we're obviously we all gonna go through this, Lupita. What is something, I don't know if like there's something that like for someone who's struggling with this, how do you help someone with this? Like what is like, I don't know if you have like a strategy, or like a that you can help somebody overcome something like this.
Yeah, I feel like when I'm in therapy in the therapy room with my clients, we can go, two different routes. One of the routes is, really thinking about how our upbringing kind of influences imposter syndrome, because we can see how the way we were raised, even just being a person of color, and the way the world perceives you, all of that can influence imposter syndrome, right? This idea of I'm not enough, I don't belong. Like, you can see how that narrative and that dialogue can really influence our experience. But even then, also, like, coming from a low income, like low SES community as well, you see that as well too, because again, you're going into these spaces or you're having these experiences and still feeling like I don't belong, I'm not deserving, I'm not enough. All those different like internal dialogues that we have, they're very much rooted from our experience and our upbringing, right? So we can go in that route. I usually do a lot of EMDR work with that route. But we can also do very like present based, like, this is what we're going to do. This is the only thing we're working on. I don't think that it actually becomes rooted to my upbringing. And we work on it in like, okay, well, what do we do now? What can you do to overcome these things? And we go through those strategies. So some of those are identifying like our own internal dialogue, right? If we're talking to ourselves and saying like, oh, I should be doing this, or oh, I need to do that, or I have to do that, those shoulds, need tos, and have tos, they influence the way we feel about ourselves, right? Because there's a lot of guilt, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of shame with those words. And so being able to like change it to the I would like to, the goal is to, that type of narrative or that type of wording usually helps as well. We're working on a lot of great things, because even like when it comes to acknowledging your achievements, whether they're small or big, we have something called our list of badassery, right? Like our list of all the badass things we do. And so we're doing this like never ending list of things that we do, and we're going through it before doing like a big presentation, before doing something that you feel like you're experiencing the imposter syndrome coming up. You go and you look through your list. There's so many different strategies that we do like in the present moment that usually help with at least alleviating it, a little bit.
I love that. I think I'm like thinking about what you're saying, and to me, like my experience with imposter syndrome is totally related to my upbringing. You know what I mean? And I don't know if like I'm thinking about someone who struggles with this or who like struggles to get out of feeling this way, and a person who maybe like is able to manage these feelings in a better way,
Yeah.
right? Like what's the difference between those two people? And I mean, I don't know, but like my mind straight up goes to like, yeah, it's probably like upbringing, like how you learn to talk to yourself, how you learn to perceive yourself as an individual, you know? And I don't know, just kind of my mind goes there. It's like
You mean
upbringing is
upbringing as in like I think like for me personally, like I was like lower middle class growing up, even like poor at times growing up. So for me, like people just I wanted to pretend that I was like an equal to people around me. I didn't want people to know that like we had food stamps, or like we were living in motels or things like that. I remember at one time I had a friend from high school I connected with like later, and she said, something about you like growing up. She's like, I remember you like your family was such a mystery because, and I was like, oh wow, like I played that role of like I need to not let people know in on the secret of like how, yeah, we're not well off, we're not doing okay, like my family's struggling, my dad's not around, like so I was already like pretending and faking and presenting and being an imposter in a lot of ways. So
yeah. Yeah,
um
I mean that's exactly what I mean. And I think about in my experience, it's also so what would you call that? Like like maybe like financial, like
I don't know, I Lupita would, I mean,
societal pressure maybe, or like right.
Yeah,
But
I mean, when I talk about imposter syndrome in those layers, right? Because it's like peeling an onion, right? You have the societal pressures, you have the SES, you have like race and ethnicity, you have like all these different things. Even when it comes to like the food stamps, right? And living up or like growing up in food deserts or things of that nature. Like there's so many different experiences that we have, and when we start to realize like, because I don't think you know those things until you start comparing yourself to other people, right? And that's the whole idea of imposter syndrome. You're comparing yourself to the next person, and you're assuming that their life is easier, that they're smarter, that they have more, all those different things. And so that experience of comparison is where that imposter syndrome really grows.
that makes sense. It's so crazy because when I said upbringing, what I went to was like how my caregivers like spoke to me or how they build my self-esteem. I
Okay.
almost like, I almost speak myself to myself in that way. And so, and I love my parents. They're amazing people. I'm not here to or bash on them or
Get
anything.
them. I'm just kidding.
But like, but, I was raised in a very traditional Mexican family, and in my
Were you
family,
the oldest sibling? The oldest sibling?
kind of. My mom had another son who's 10 years older, but he never lived with us. So I was like kind of like the oldest sibling.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, it was kind of like if you messed up, it was really like highlighted. It was like, hey, why did you mess that up? Like, why did you do that? Like instead of like a compassionate sort of like, oh, it's okay, like shit happens, or yeah, or like if you maybe act out, right? Like you get punished, and oh, you don't deserve to do this. You don't. So and a lot of times they're doing their best to parent. They don't have like the modern strategies we have today. But in a way, I kind of internalize that way now. And like without, if I'm not mindful of it, like when I'm taking on a new project or taking a new course or even going through a rough patch in life, like I almost catch myself talking to myself in the same way that, my parents were talking to me. So
100%.
yeah. So I just love how complex it is because it's like, you talked about something completely different than what I thought
Well,
about.
I think that's the power of this, right? Is like when people, I mean, that's why talk therapy is so powerful. But like, just, I was thinking as she brought up too, culturally, like I grew up like as a white kid with like a lot of black kids around me. Like I was like the white kid in the black neighborhood. So for me, like skin color, seeing something different. I wanted to be more like them. So I already felt that imposter. On top of that, like not having my father around, I didn't really know what a representation of a man was really. So like I have my mom and my sister and my dad's in and out. So I have this idea of like, I don't know. Yeah, I have no idea how to do this just to be a guy, to be a man. So like there's all these things I think sprinkles in this imposter phenomenon. So it's like striking a nerve with me right now as you bring up these things as we talk. So
I can see how
100%.
this topic is. It's so crazy.
Yeah, it's really bonkers. And even just mentioning, like hearing both of your experiences, like we can even kind of segue into these archetypes because within imposter syndrome, there's these different types of archetypes, and there are different experiences even within imposter syndrome, right? Because when you're mentioning, Manny, you're mentioning the experience that you have as potentially kind of being like the older sibling. You can see that experience being almost kind of like the soloist, and even for you as well too, because this idea of like you are the only one, you're supposed to kind of be the trailblazer of the situation, or no one else really experiences the same thing, so there's a lot of expectation of like, well, I can't really ask for help, right? Like I can't, like I'm supposed to know it all. I'm supposed to know what it is to be a man, right? And I'm supposed to know how to be the person that gets the good grades and maybe the first person to go to school in my entire family. Like there's this idea of like not being able to ask for help. You see that a lot with like children that come in that are like in single parent households, right? Because you see the single parent kind of figuring it out on their own, trying to do things on their own. And so internally you're already observing like, shit, if my mom or my dad do this on their own, like I'm almost supposed to do it on my own, right? Like that's the norm for me. Like asking for help is a sign of weakness. And so there's so much to it with that idea of like the soloist, right? Like there's this pressure of needing to know it all and not being able to ask for help.
Dang, that's crazy.
so Lupita, you started to bring it up. There's 5 types. Could you mentioned the soloist? Would you mind like talking about the 5 and like and as you did like somewhat of an example of the soloist? Could you give us some examples
Yeah,
of that?
yeah. So there's also the perfectionist, and that's definitely something that I personally struggle with for sure. This idea of like having a very like unattainable almost kind of like an unattainable goal or unattainable way of like performing, right? And so because of that, a lot of people actually experience a lot of procrastination. And so you have this idea of like, you have this grandiose idea of like this project that you're wanting to do, but it's so big and it's so exciting that you're like, I don't even know where to start. And so there's a lot of procrastination that goes to it. That's definitely something I struggle with. You see that a lot with just people in general that sometimes can be like first gens, people of color, older siblings, even this idea of like growing up in a low SES and thinking like, my mom struggled very hard, or my dad struggled, in raising our family, or my caregiver struggled. And so now I have to be able to help my family. I have to be able to get myself in and do better. And so there's this internal pressure of being this perfectionist because you're needing to basically achieve this success. Right. And so that internal pressure, whether it's even from your family or yourself, right? Because it could also be like, oh no, like this is the doctor of the family, right? Like she's the person or he's the person that's going to like take us out of la pobreza, or the us being poor. So that idea of perfectionism really can come from both internally or externally.
Yeah,
So the
salvation, right?
perfectionist, yeah, go for it.
I was just gonna say that our salvation, right? Like the whole family's looking for you to save them. Sorry, go ahead, keep going. Yeah, this is good.
So we have the expert. The expert's the person that basically has these expectations to have to know it all, right? And for them, if they ask for the help, they're seen as like failures. They see themselves as failures, or they see themselves of like not really like almost kind of like being losers, right? So a lot of people that maybe are wanting to do better at their jobs, or they're wanting to apply for a new position, they may not necessarily apply until they meet every single qualification, because they're expected to be the expert before getting to the next level. So we have the expert. Again, the importance of it is about how much they know and what they know, so they need to know it all. So again, a lot of shame when it comes to asking for help. Then we have the superstar. The superstar is also something that I struggle with, which is a person that just has multiple roles and multiple responsibilities. And so this person can, see themselves as a wife, as a mother, as a student, as a therapist, as all these different roles. But the struggle here is that you have this expectation to meet all these roles and excel in them. So there's a lot of guilt that comes to it, right? And so there's a lot of like you wanting to do all the things, and you having a hard time saying no, or you having a hard time just like creating boundaries, because again, you're trying to be the superstar and trying to achieve all these roles. Then we have the last one, which is the soloist, the one that I mentioned earlier. And yeah, so we kind of talked about that one a little bit too.
Yeah, wow. So a bunch of different archetypes. That's why this is so dense, like the experience, and it kind of leads to the same thing. I guess it's just this experience of insecurity is kind of what we're talking about here, right? Like feeling just insecure in a role, feeling insecure in a situation, and yeah, and a part of I'm just like thinking back to like how powerful it is to know that this is a thing. You know what I mean? It's like it's not just me like being inadequate, right? But it's a thing that people
Phenomenon,
experience.
that's what it is.
Yeah,
It's just like
yeah,
this thing where it's just, I don't know the full definition of phenomenon, but it's something like just bigger than something that, yeah, it almost kind of takes over. So
yeah.
When I think of the word phenomenon, because I also don't really know the definition, but I think of like something magical, something big, right? Like it's like a phenomenon. Like it's so big, and it kind of like blows your mind because you don't realize how big it is.
Yeah.
yeah.
I was thinking about I was actually listening to I don't know if you guys know Timothy Keller, but
Who is Timothy Keller?
he's a Christian sermon. He actually passed away
Okay.
not too long ago. I don't want to get into religion or anything, but I was listening to the sermon just as part of like my routine in the morning. And he was talking about something that I think kind of relates to this, right? And so I just kind of want to share it with you guys. Like he was talking about um how we, we're I forget what exactly he words he used. I'm gonna butcher it, but we're clothed in so many different things as human beings. Like, we're to avoid people seeing like our true selves, our
Yeah.
rawness, our inner beings, right? We're clothed in academics, in certifications, we're clothed in money, in finances, in our jobs, in our relationships, right? And we get this sort of sense of like worthiness or pride from some of these things, right? Like, oh, like I'm finally married, like I'm worthy now because I have a family, or I finally got that degree, so now I can feel like I really am who I say I am, or I can really like get into a room and bring value to someone because I've clothed myself in all these different things. And so it kind of just reminds me of this conversation we're having because it, I don't know, I guess I just, a part of like our work as therapists and counseling is like letting people know that like, they bring value, right? Like it's like all this outside shit is just that.
Yeah.
It's outside
Well, I think
shit,
I think my hope too is just like, through working with somebody, in those rooms, therapy, group therapy, whatever it is, like hopefully you're in your rawest forms. And that's why like hope we were talking about this before we started, is like we were saying like, when are we not imposters? We didn't say it exactly like that, but I was telling him like, and maybe I think I mentioned this earlier, just like the world is a stage. I think of like Robin Williams, how we're always
Mhm.
having to perform in some ways. And I think of Robin Williams because he was such an entertainer, like on and energetic. And but you would, if you know anything about his story, behind the curtain was a man who really struggled with depression and anxiety and alcoholism. And we so often have to be on. I can't remember. I feel like unless when we were kids and maybe we're in the most natural form and we just don't know. But like as soon as we get into a role of a relationship or a job, it's all of a sudden there is a performance aspect of things, because if you're not performing, if you're not on, you can get pushed away or you're not a part of like. So but that's what I said, like I was saying, like in our Ross forms, I think is in like a therapy session we see somebody being genuine or trying to find what genuine looks like. And but it's hard not to present, I guess, in some ways. So
Well,
Yeah.
I think with many mentioned, and even right now with you too, I mean, the ultimate goal is to think about experiencing unconditional love, right? And experiencing this idea of worthiness without having to perform or without having to. So there's like this idea of like, we have to almost kind of like create a wall to protect ourselves, because if people know our truest rawest form, then there's this fear of like being rejected, or this fear of not being worthy of this love. And so even when it comes to imposter syndrome, I mean, when we're working in therapy and we're doing like the deep core like work, like it really ultimately goes down to like this idea of being enough, right? This idea of being worthy and experiencing and really almost kind of like not just experiencing but deserving the unconditional love, right? Because we're creating this facade to the world because of the fear.
Yeah. And maybe that's at the root of all this, right? All our needs of like being accepted, right? Being accepted and feeling worthy of that love, like you just said. And the this feeling of having to prove yourself is where you kind of get in trouble.
right, well, people are going to love me because of this, or they're going to love me because of that. So, and I recently talked to a group of clients about when is there such thing as unconditional love? Like, and most people would be like, well, my kids, right? They love me no matter what, but they're conditioned to love us when they need things. But then as they get older, it's like, hey, I'm
Mm.
good. I can walk. I can feed myself now. Like, get out the way. So, it, it's that's a real it's a challenging concept for a lot of people, like, but to just love in the truest form is like, I'm gonna love you not no matter what. I mean, there are probably some things that will get in the way, but like letting people just care and love you because it's you, and they want to be in your life, and they've allowed you, or they accept you for the flaws and all that. So
I feel like a big part of this is who you surround yourself with. You know what I mean? Like a big part of this is like people who are on your same, just their same wavelength. You're saying like people who understand that like it's not about bragging. It's not about like we would just want to accept this accepting mindset, I guess. I play soccer on Sundays with a group of people, and it's so funny because you sit back and you look at like everyone like showboating something or like trying to like fit in or even picking on someone else to like make themselves feel better. I'm sure it happens in like all competitive areas, but like it's just a bunch of just guys, a bunch of testosterone running around, right, trying to like one up each other. But I do get that feeling sometimes of like, man, like these guys are really good, or like I can't do that. And so I noticed that's more heightened in me when I'm around this group than
Mm.
when I'm around like maybe like the therapist who I do consult with and who like get vulnerable and they're like, man, I feel like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel that way too. It's just a different experience, different wavelength. So I think a big part of this is like, who are you surrounded by, like on your just everyday basis, right? Like,
Lupita, you mentioned just for like people that don't know, you mentioned EMDR. What is EMDR? We don't have to go like fully into it, but briefly, like what is EMDR and why would this be so much? You kind of you deciphered like two different clients, like one you might would use EMDR and the other you wouldn't. Like what is EMDR and how would that be effective for somebody who's dealing with imposter phenomenon?
So EMDR is a type of therapy. There's many different types of therapies or like interventions or techniques that you would use, but EMDR is one of them. You become like it's an evidence-based practice and you become trained in it. But the idea or the concept behind it is that you're almost kind of like using memories or core experiences that you have, and you're trying to find the patterns of like what is this internal dialogue, right? So you're almost kind of like investigating your life story in a sense, trying to figure out what this internal dialogue is. For people that experience imposter syndrome, again, I'm not enough, sorry. I'm unworthy, or I'm not deserving. Sometimes even like I'm defective. And so you're identifying these like core beliefs and trying to pinpoint these like memories that you have, because those memories tend to bring up a lot of emotions, right? They tend to bring up a lot of experience, even to this day, right? Because the whole point is that you're almost kind of processing trauma. And again, trauma is very much like a to the eye of the beholder, right? The person that experiences it. And so if it's something that you experience and it brings up emotion, then we would label that, as trauma. And so you're identifying these memories, and you're using something called eye movements or bilateral stimulation. And so that's why it's eye movement, reprocess, all that stuff, right? It's a EMDR. So you either do eye movements, because the majority of the time I'm using virtual, I'll sometimes use like a program, and it's literally like this little ball that goes from one side to the other. And, as a therapist, you're kind of controlling speed and the amount of time that you're having them look at this ball. And that's, again, because of training, certain protocols that you're following depending on the person. And so the goal really is for this memory to not become as triggering, to not be as triggering, sorry, to not elicit as much emotion. And so you're almost kind of creating this distance from this memory, so that now, rather than, this memory being triggered by new experiences, right? Because let's say that the idea is I'm not enough because my dad or my mom told me that, I got a B instead of an A. And so now I'm getting grounded because of all these B's. And so that feeling comes up a lot when you fail at a job, and so now this experience of I'm not enough comes up and you're feeling all anxious. You would reprocess that memory and then realize that future triggers won't be as triggering. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So thank you. Because for somebody that is just listening to this, they hear EMDR, they have like no idea what that is. And it is a very popular form when it comes to working with clients with trauma. So thanks for just, you explaining that quite well, I thought. So,
well, I think back to like my experience with imposter syndrome and like a lot of it, I think it is these past interactions that who knows like what they actually are, but maybe putting some time into like thinking back to these memories and how painful maybe an experience was that you haven't really even realized, right? It reminds me of just the idea of like attachment injuries, right? Like those like little things that you grew up with, those little interactions that maybe hurt you, or where you felt rejected, or where you felt not good enough, that you kind of have buried, and like maybe you don't even remember those things affecting you that way, but somehow they still come up in certain relationships right now, right? And
yeah, and before we even go there too, I want to make it clear too that when it comes to EMDR, you're not jumping into this core work right away. Like there's certain phases, and before even getting to phase 4, which is when you do the reprocessing, you're collecting data, you're learning coping skills, you're trying to really learn how to self-regulate, how to be able to manage those emotions, because as you're reprocessing, depending on like what level of reprocessing you're doing, a lot of memories can naturally come up that you have no control over, because it's just kind of resurfacing. So you want to make sure that there's a lot more preparation before really going into that. But you mentioned the attachment wounds, and I think that you're very spot on with that, because again, when it comes to EMDR and imposter syndrome, you're very much like you doing a lot of attachment work, right? You're really trying to think about how your upbringing has really influenced the current situation, your current relationships, even your relationship with your boss can sometimes be triggered by these attachment, like these experiences you had in early childhood. Mm-hmm.
For sure. It's so funny. Jesse was my boss one time.
Your second best boss, right?
Yeah,
We talked about that in an early episode.
yeah.
I'm still kind of resentful about that.
And I don't remember if you remember this, Jesse, but one time Jesse pulls me aside and says, I think you like confronted me about something.
I'm not ready for this, so go ahead. This is something I
I'm not
don't
ready. I'm getting red over here for you.
So like I remember you confronted me about like if I like these so you I think you might have done something that like you weren't supposed to do. You changed up something in the program we were working at, and then you were like, "Hey, did you tell me? Did you like tell like or something like that?" I can't like remember, but I remember I was like, "Dang, I feel like I'm getting in trouble right now." And actually, it was a cool moment we had where I think we probably became really good friends at that moment because I was like, "No, dude, like I look up to you. Like I would never do that." So we can actually connect. It was a good moment. We
It
connected
sounds like
there.
I did something pretty suspect right now. So you're even a better friend by not saying what it is.
I don't remember. So yeah, and I'm not gonna put you on the spot like that. But anyway, it kind of reminds me of that idea, right? Of like you like this relationship I had with you, like reflecting back on it, I was like, damn, I felt like when I did something wrong and I would get caught and my mom would be like, hey, what are you doing? Like she caught me, but she wanted me to like fess up to it. She wanted me to like I was like, dang, dude. So
I
Like, what did you do on this day? And they already know what you did. And you're like, what did you do on that day?
Wait, so
yeah.
you did the suspect thing, not me.
No, you did it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And you thought I told on you.
Oh,
Like,
okay, yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
So um I have a question for you, Lupita, and I'm gonna maybe put you on the spot right now a little bit, but like
Just
I
like you did
wanna
me right now. That's
yeah,
okay.
I
Here,
just
it's your turn. So here you go.
I'm on a wrecking mission. Yeah.
Victor.
So what so from the person who deals with this, from the person who's like, you're specializing in this, what do you like what's something maybe like you're in this area that you're like, man, this is something I'm starting to feel some imposter syndrome from, and what are you doing to help you work through that? Maybe something currently or before. I don't know. I'll let you pick that, but I want to know like what strategy does the specialty the person who specializes in this do for
This is what
herself?
Manny does. He just brings up things you're not ready for. So
Yeah, a
No,
mission.
I have multiple actually. I have multiple. I think one of them, and I think I want to when I'm thinking of these archetypes, like thinking about this idea of perfectionism and being a perfectionist. I know I've had maybe about four years now of thinking of all these different things that I want to do with my practice, and you get really excited because as a solo owner, like you basically have the wheel to do whatever the hell you want, right? And so because of that, I get very excited and very creative, and I have all these ideas, but then nothing ever happens. Obviously, life happened. I had a kid, and I was trying to figure out life for like 2 years after that, because my brain was a fog and things were just a mess in here. And so there wasn't that planning and that creative juices that they weren't flowing. And now that they are, there's almost this like idea of like, oh, I have all these great ideas, but don't know where to start. And so there's a lot of procrastination that happens. And I've actually had multiple podcast interviews, and at the end, they usually say like, "Oh, do you have any offerings?" And so I'm like, "Yeah, I'm gonna have some workshops. They're gonna be at the end of the summer." And now I'm like, "Shit, we're already like at the beginning of summer, and I'm nowhere near those projects." So that usually happens on that aspect, right? This idea of perfectionism, having these big ideas, and not really like procrastinating on them, and not really doing much about it. I think right now, and the stinger in your question of like, what are you doing about it now? Right now at the moment, I feel like that's been put on pause. My kid just started daycare, and so that was also a really big deal for me. And so I've been kind of navigating my own emotions as a first-time mother and having my 2-year-old be in daycare full time. And so that's kind of been the primary goal right now for the month of June. But I think I'm starting to get acclimated. He not so much, but I'm hoping that maybe by next month I'll start prioritizing, since I'll have a lot more free time. Start prioritizing more of the creative stuff for my practice. So that's one thing. Yeah.
So yeah, you don't got too much going on. You're just a mama, and you got someone transition into school, and yeah, you got that's a lot, and
Yeah, and I think that goes even into this idea of being a superstar, right? Or wanting to like perfect all these roles, like being a mother, being a sole owner of a business, and being a wife and being a daughter. There's so many different important roles in my life that I want to make sure that I prioritize, and it can become very difficult sometimes.
yeah. I mean, wow, what a powerful thing too, just to think about, like, just to even give a moment to reflect on everything you just said, and like, damn, I got a lot going on right now. Like, I feel like even just that self-compassion is so important, right? It's like, okay, like I got some shit going on. And
Mhm.
thank you for sharing that too, because about, how it goes with your private practice, because I mean, I'm dealing with the same thing. I'm in private practice, I get creative, and then I start like bagging on my own ideas. I'm like, no, I can't do that. No, that's impossible. How am I going to do that? And and then times when I think back, I'm like, why haven't I done anything already? And I don't like what you just did, just made me think about, like, wait, I just had a kid. Wait, like we're like transitioning. We have a 7-month-old right now. Like we got a 4-year-old, and there's so many. My wife is taking up a class. Like there's so many things happening. We're doing this just even that question, why haven't I done anything? We're doing this podcast. Like, there's so many things we're doing that we don't give ourselves credit for. And we can go down that like loophole, right? Of like,
But I mean, that's life. I mean, I think the idea of like, procrastination is something that perfectionism, tying into um, one of the five architects, but like it's life though. Like things take over and we feel like we do. You're a big dreamer. Like you are one to like really lay out like I want to do this, I want to do that. But then the priorities come up and our priorities, and we make these things priorities. Maybe it's family, maybe it's kids, maybe it's relationships. So it seems like all these things that I had planned, like even what you talked about, like I have these workshops and things like that. It's not that the goal we will get there at some point in times, but life does intercept in some way. So it's just like we have to. I feel like for me, like I have to accept, like, okay, this is okay to take a step back from. I don't have to feel like less than because I haven't achieved this goal yet. Like, there's other things that are, I think, more maybe just more important in that moment in time. So yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And I think when it comes to this idea or this concept of self-compassion, I feel like I didn't really have it or really didn't understand that concept fully until I became a parent, to be quite honest, 2 years ago. Because they teach you about patience and they teach you about self-compassion, and you're practicing like this idea of not knowing how to be a parent. So this like every day of your life. And so this idea of failure isn't really an option anymore. It's like flexibility, it's forgiveness, it's self-compassion. So it's I'm in a really beautiful like place and phase in my life where even though I do have these creative, ideas, there isn't that internal dialogue of like, oh, I'm fucking up, or oh, like I'm lagging it on this, or none of that, because I know that knowing myself, I'll still get it done, but just in a different time. There's a different time frame.
That's cool that just having peace or being content with that. That's like that's free. That's just great. Like that's a great thing to hear from you. So
yeah, heck yeah, dude. Give me some of that.
I think as we're wrapping up here today, is there anything else like that you want to bring up or ask Lupita?
Are you taking clients, Lupita?
Yeah, yeah, I am taking clients, not as many. I have maybe about two slots available at the moment. I think they're on Tuesdays and Wednesdays in the morning. Not 100% sure, but if anyone is looking for a therapist, they could definitely reach out to me. My Instagram handle is Therapy of the Sun, and you could just find me at therapyofthesun.com, and just, complete an interest form if you're interested. Mhm.
So Tuesday mornings, I am free at that time, so maybe we can link up so you can give me a session or two. And what are you like? Is there so you people can keep up with you and whatever you do, but is there anything you are planning at all? This
Being a wife, being a mother. No, no, no. I do really want to get into committing myself to at least doing some sort of workshop, whether it's live, more than likely it'll be live, maybe by the end of summer or at least beginning of fall. So just follow me and you'll definitely get some updates. I have this idea of like creating almost kind of like a program of some sort, right? Thinking about condensing all the things that we work on in therapy into like multiple workshops, where you're learning all the skills, learning all the different interventions to kind of be able to overcome some of those imposter phenomenon experiences. So that's definitely what I have in mind. We'll just see what actually happens. But if you follow me, we'll see where I go in a couple of months.
Yeah, it's gonna be even bigger than what you picture right now. So
In the meantime, you're killing it, and thank you so much for like coming on here and spending some time with us. Yeah, it's been great. So
awesome. Thank you.
thanks,
Thank,
Lupita.
thank you guys so much. I really appreciate your time and your interest in just getting to know my story a little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you for being on. And let's wrap this up.
Yeah, until next time.
Until next
Thanks
time.
again.